Welcome to the Petersen's Bowhunting Podcast. All bow hunting, all the time. Now, here's your host, Editor Christian Berg.
All right, welcome to the Bowhunting Podcast. All bow hunting, all the time. Today, it's going to be a really interesting conversation, and it's going to be a fun time because I've got a guest that I always enjoy spending time with. Somebody who isn't just one of our field editors, isn't just one of the best bow hunters that I know, and I would argue one of the best bow hunters in America, but I would say a good friend of mine who I've really enjoyed getting to know over the years. That's Mr. Eddie Claypool from the great state of Oklahoma. Eddie, welcome back.
Thanks. Good to be here.
You know, you have had some major changes in your whitetail hunting perspective over the last several years, and mainly pertaining or surrounding the fact that you and Peggy were able to buy a nice piece of ground out in Kansas. And for the first time in your life, you've got some dirt of your own. And of course, you always made your bones in this game being a dyed-in-the-wool public land bow hunter. And you had something happen to you this past fall, which I think everybody, whether we own ground or not, because I don't own land, but I've got permission to hunt on some farms here close to home. And I've experienced the same thing. I think everybody can relate. And it's the great somebody shot my buck story.
Yeah.
And of course the "my" is in quotation marks, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
But I mean, we've all done it, right, Eddie? I mean, you see a deer on trail camera, or you have an encounter with a particular deer.
Yeah.
You just see him feeding out in the food plot on your farm, and all of a sudden we start to think that these critters are like our property.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of, different this year because it's on my own place and you feel a little more ownership. I mean, even in the past, hunting public land, I've been on some pretty good deer before that I knew existed and usually had a picture or two of, and had other people end up harvesting them. One time on a public parcel in Kansas, I had a competitor hunting right there around. We were hunting in the same general area on the public, and he was from actually your home state of Pennsylvania, had come all the way down to Kansas, and he ended up harvesting the buck that I was after. So yeah, it happens, and it just makes it a little different when it's on your own dirt. You get to putting the "my" on it a little too much, and I got a rude awakening that they're not my deer; they're the public's deer, and they go everywhere. And so I lived through that little incident, and I'm ready to move on and get my head screwed on back straight a little better now.
Well, I don't know, man. You sent me a picture. Was this during the gun season? It must have been, because you had an orange vest on.
Yeah, it was the opening day of the gun season. And, Kansas is a baiting state. And so everybody up there, especially the firearms guys, all they do is go dump a big pile of corn out somewhere and get up on a hill or somewhere close and just sit there and shoot them. It's not really hunting. And I sure wish there was Kansas Game and Fish would, do something about maybe getting rid of the baiting deal. But anyway, I had that deer on my property for 2 or 3 years there and had watched him grow up to a really awesome buck this year. And I had him by me twice in November and made the very difficult decision not to shoot him. And I've never let a deer that size walk. He was in somewhere in the upper 160s, close to 170. And then the first day of gun season, he had evidently followed a hot doe over across my fence to my neighbor. And the guy was in town and got a cellular camera picture of the buck and jumped in his truck and run out there and parked just off my fence corner and walked around the hill there. In about 30 minutes time, shot that buck and was done.
Well, so that's, there's a lot there that we can dive into, right. from the cell camera to just you passing the deer. So, let's walk through it, because I think it's a really interesting discussion. Sure. And to really do it justice, we got to take a step back to you guys buying this property in the first place, which was now how many years ago? Was this your third season this past fall, Eddie, on your place?
Yes, this was our third autumn there. We had bought it the 2 summers before, and shortly thereafter we bought it, we had our first hunting season, and now we've had 2 more. So we just finished up kind of our third. Yes.
And so, in the past, like you talked about the size of this deer, probably, that 160 to 170, and you never, ever would have, thought twice about passing a deer like that. All the years that you hunted on public ground, I mean, you'd have had an arrow gone faster than you could, say boo.
Right.
So, talk to me about, how your mindset changed when you started hunting your own dirt. And I know from even talking to you in years past, just even passing deer pretty much at all, you were having some cognitive dissonance over that because you're like, what in the world am I doing?
Right. Yeah. Bow hunting and maturing as a bow hunter is a process. And if you're hardcore, you're going to go through quite a few stages of it to get to the final goal of, it's kind of a circle. I feel you start out, just trying to get something, and then you end up setting goals. And as those goals get bigger and bigger, you'll usually get to a point where you realize you're kind of losing your marbles here. This is not sensible. And when I was hunting public land and running around and trying to knock on doors and get permission to hunt, I kind of set a standard of about a 140 type buck was what I wanted to get. But anytime a Pope and Young caliber animal come by, especially, on public for sure, I felt like I better harvest it because it was all I could do to get those opportunities. And when I got my own place, all of a sudden, after one season on it, I saw that I should, in a realistic scenario, have 3 or 4 of those a season, and possibly more. And as the years here have gone by, I've even got a lot more aware of the fact that some of these deer are never going to get real big. Their antlers they're going to top out at maybe, some of them top out at 125 or 30 as mature deer. And some of them can be, this deer was 3.5-year-old buck. The first year we seen him, I didn't pay him any attention whatsoever. He had a distinguishing trait his first year, but he was just a small antler deer. And then last year he jumped up into about the 135 maybe range. And I wasn't interested in killing him. And then this year during the summer, he blew up and went to, he put on 35 inches of antler. And I knew his genetics were tremendous. He went to a 6x6 typical, and he was going to be a deer that, given another year or two, could have turned into, probably my one in a lifetime deer. But it was a roll of the dice. I took the chance. And, now that I have the opportunity to make that decision, which is weird to me because in the past, like you said, anything that was in the 160 range on public land or even private land that I just had gained access to would have been a shooter deer in a heartbeat. I would have been thrilled and called it good right there and counted my blessings. But human nature, we get a little greedy when it's our own baby, and we start setting higher standards. And so I kind of went through that process now, and I've got to get back a little bit more real and just move forward, hunt my average mature deer.
Yeah, but I don't know if you do. And I'm interested to see where we end up at the end of this, because in spite of the disappointment, I'm still not sure that what you did was the wrong call. Because I've heard, okay, we're on a different end of the spectrum here in Pennsylvania. Because when you talk about Kansas and some of these deer topping out around 130, I mean, heck, some of our deer, not that we get a lot of old deer here because we shoot an awful lot of young ones.
Right.
But some of our deer are going to top out at 100, 110 inches.
Yeah.
And just some really cool, gnarly old bucks that won't score really well.
Right.
And of course we do get some 140s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even some 200s on occasion. But generally, we don't have a ton of big bucks. But where I was going with this, Eddie, is we have a saying around here, we hear a lot, and it's frustrating to those of us who would like to see some more bigger bucks, is guys will say, well, if I don't shoot them, the neighbor's going to shoot them, so you have this 2.5-year-old 8-pointer coming through your woodlot.
Right.
And the guy thinks, if I don't shoot him, my neighbor's going to shoot him. And I always feel like, man, what a terrible justification for killing an animal,
Yeah, it is.
But,
yeah,
go ahead.
That gun hunter that shot my deer, when I talked to him, I said, hey, I'm trying to grow a few better deer out here, and you guys will be some of the beneficiaries of it. What do you think about maybe we kind of have a meeting of the minds? And I said, from that 150 to 170 range is a jump that is one more year. I said, how about it? What do you think about letting some walk? And he basically said that the saying around there is that if they're 150 and brown, they're down, and up there in Kansas, most every gun hunter, if it's a 150 caliber deer or above, they're not letting it walk. And I get it. That's a nice buck. But that 1 year right there can be the difference between a 150 and a 180, maybe the next year, and it's just the way it is. Just have to learn to deal with it.
Well, and it's like you said, you take your chance willingly, because the other side of that, what we talked about is, the guy saying, well, if I don't shoot it, the neighbor will. But then my reply always is, well, look, if you don't shoot it, the neighbor he might kill it. But I'll tell you one thing, if you kill it, it's dead. If it's you dead, kill it, it's dead, and the neighbor ain't going to do nothing with it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
But if you let it go,
right,
the neighbor might kill it, but he might not. Right. So anyway, but before we go further, I want to get more of this backstory, because there's other things that come into this, Eddie. First of all, I got to ask, did you have a name for this deer? Because everyone got a name now for every big buck. Surely you called this thing something.
Yeah, no name. I named one that first year. Earl, killed him because he needed to be killed. He was just no junkie deer, and I didn't like the taste in my mouth. I don't, to each his own, but no names for deer for us. We referred to this deer as the big 6x6.
Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because there's more. It's not just owning the ground,
right?
That was a big part of this, but you've been doing a lot of habitat work as well. So you haven't owned this land all that long, but you've already spent quite a good deal of time doing various things, and just give folks a little sort of summary of the different projects that you've undertaken in your time, since you had the place.
Yeah, I'm kind of a only child syndrome. Learn on your own, paint as you go. I'm not really into all this reading and learning and then taking expert advice. I got to do it. I'll goof it up, then I'll do it right. And I've just been learning a lot of mine. And I definitely have learned some things that I did not know. Like one of them that revolved around the baiting thing. I did not give baiting enough account. I had no idea how you can absolutely drain a property just by being next door to it sometimes with bait. I mean, them whitetails will walk out in the 4-lane and stand to eat that corn, I guess. I've never baited. I've never wanted to. But one thing about it, I'm going to be forced to put some sort of a feed station out in the center of my property, out in the prairie. I'm not going to hunt it, but I am going to have to try to keep my deer on my property, because they will take off and cross in every direction that if the neighbors are doing it and you're not. It's just a stinking deal. I wished it wasn't part of hunting, the baiting thing. And then as far as the habitat, my place is like 80% open ground. It's grasslands, it's prairie with wooded draws. And so what I've been doing is trying to stop. They have a community burn up there, and they burn everything every spring. And I've stopped that, and hopefully I'm going to keep it from burning for a few years. And the prairie is starting to grow up and get thicker now, and have all kinds of different vegetation, and the deer are getting a little bit more comfortable out in it. And if I get it to where they can, bed out in it and stay out in it, I will have basically doubled or tripled my amount of habitat that can hold deer. Because when they just live in my timbered cover, they're not able to live on but about a quarter of my property. And I think I'm going to be able to change that a little bit. It's getting a whole lot better. And I've been cutting down some cedar thickets, opening them up and letting it grow in underneath them a lot better and get a lot more browse. And because after having planted some food plots and stuff, I see that, food plots are fine, but they're not a cure-all. The deer will come through them and browse on them a little bit and go right on about their business and spend most of their day out there in the prairie and in the woods browsing. Food plots are not a cure-all at my place. They just nibble on them and move on. And so, I've learned that I can't do a whole lot other than, make my natural cover better. Let it get thicker and let it get more diverse. There's a lot of browse and stuff in my native. I had cattle on my property almost year round for as far as time went back, and that's stopped now. So the stuff's getting a chance to grow out, and I'm going to start cutting more mature timber down and letting a lot of new stuff come up. And I'm learning, and that's what I bought the property for, was to play with and to learn, make mistakes, and get better. And hopefully within a few more years, I'll have twice the number of deer I have on my property, because on any given day, we always laugh and we say I probably have a total of 15 to 18, maybe 20 deer on that half a square mile of mine. It's not a high deer density area, but if I can get that up to 30 or 40 deer on any given day, I'll have a lot better fun, get to see more deer, and have more intense rutting action,
Well, I bet you'll end up eventually with a lot more deer than even that, Eddie. If I give you long enough, you'll have a pile of deer in there. But I think it's interesting that the cover and the browse are probably, at least at this point, and again, maybe it'll change over the years. You'll continue to learn and refine and try different things. But it's probably overlooked by the average hunter, because if you give the average guy, myself included, a piece of ground and say, hey, you can do some management here, food plot's the first thing you think about.
Oh, I fell into the same trap. The very first thing I did was go in and start making all these plans for food plots and implement them. And then I had them sitting there with very few deer messing with them the first year. I mean, they would come through there and browse a little and go right on and go over there and start nibbling on stuff. And I'm like, hey, man, what is the deal? You got all this agricultural. I mean, I had everything from, of course, in the summer, I'm not going to kid you, they do love bean fields. You know that. And you can harbor some deer and do some good stuff with bean fields. But in the fall, they're not interested that much in, they're at their peak weight. The does are healthy and happy, and they don't just stand around and eat your winter wheat and your alfalfa and your clover. They browse on it 10, 15 minutes here and there and go on about their everyday lives. And as I started cluing into that and started opening a lot more cover up and, mowing stuff down and letting it re-sprout, for different types of new growth, man, they like it. They actually, I think, would rather eat native, new, young browse than food plots,
Well, and the nice thing about the browse and the cover is that they kind of go hand in hand. And then you have areas that not only are feeding deer, but are holding deer. And deer feel very comfortable. If a deer, especially a mature buck, think about it. If a mature buck has a choice between stepping out into a wide open food plot and eating there, or he has another area where he can bed and basically stand up and eat just by walking around in circles right there by his bed, where do you think he's going to spend the most of his time?
Yeah. And you would have thought I would have known. I did know it, but it's that infatuation of a new place, and the human nature is, well, I'm going to make this better. When in fact, Mother Nature can usually be you can't beat Mother Nature really. You can supplement her a little bit, give her a little help, but those, like my deer, are native prairie out in the middle of nowhere deer. They're not used to agriculture, and they've made a living off that land since the beginning of time. And I just thought I'd run in there and give them some chocolate cake, and they don't necessarily prefer chocolate cake.
Yeah, well, the other thing, Eddie, is this particular deer, to kind of come back to him. So this, because we kind of set the stage and give people some perspective on, where you're starting out from with this property. This deer, the big 6x6, as you call them, that's going to be a deer that you will never forget, because really that was the first really big special deer that you probably ever had on your place. And so if you own that, you're going to own that probably for the rest of your life. With good health, you're going to have 20, maybe a little more than 20 years left of hunting on that place. You're never going to forget this deer.
No, not at all. And that's a catch-22. I've never related to knowing a deer. That just is foreign to me. Usually for the past 40 years of my hunting life, I'd see a deer. I never knew it existed. And if I didn't get it and take it home with me right then, I'd never see it again most of the time. And it's kind of, I'm getting a lot, sentimental, and getting to where if I had been able to have harvested this 6x6 this year or even the next, I probably would have sat down there in privacy and cried, probably, because it's going to be it's a bittersweet thing when you're used to being around animals on your property, not necessarily seeing them, but they get in your head. They're part of your life. You have a pride and a sense of ownership. You're giving them security. You're giving them a great place to live their life. And one day when you take their life, it's definitely going to be a little gut wrenching,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a difference between, all those years that you're hunting the public land.
Right.
You think about what you're invested in. There you were invested in the time that you had in it and your travel to get to those places, and the limit on your time there before you had to go back home again. And so yeah, you had like a sense of urgency to punch that tag with the first good buck that comes along. Now, instead of your investment mindset being what you have invested in your time, now it's more of what you have invested in the property and your relationship with that property. So you're looking at those deer, differently.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's more to me about the whole 365 is what makes it special. I mean, I get a kick out of every season up there. I'm always planning and learning and fiddling around, and I'll see a deer, I'll see a fawn, I see old one horn, I see the doe with the loppy ear. I mean, we get to see a lot of these local deer quite often, and I see them on camera even more. And I get more fun out of looking at them, watching them live their life, go through the cycles that they go through, than I do hunting them. I mean, the hunt now to me is a mild-mannered thing, because it's like once I've hunted this property long enough, there's only so many things you can learn about, the actual where to get and what to do, because you pretty well figure it out and you know where to go and what to do. And the challenge that I spent for 40 years was a run and gun tactic, was, running into new places I'd never set foot on. And within a matter of very little time, putting a boot to them, making a quick hunt here and there, and making good decisions and pulling a deer out of there. And that's satisfying. I'm going to get back to that some. I'm not just going to 100% set on my place. I don't want to lose my roots. I want to still be able to keep some of my savvy, being able to go from.
And you want to be able to go over to some public land and shoot a nice 145-inch deer and feel good about it, right? Because if that same deer was at your place, you might not shoot them.
Exactly. And, the antler size is just a method of trying to up the ante. Like if it's a mature deer, a 5-year-old type buck or older, really that is something that, whether it's on public or private, and whether it's 140 or 180, the antlers are just a genetic fluke thing. I mean, I'm going to get to where I harvest a couple of older bucks here and there once in a while, and probably not shoot great big antler deer a lot. I'd like to let my place go. I know this buck that got killed probably passed some good genetics on this year. He went right through the whole November rut and hopefully and surely bred some does. And so that 6x6 genetic might be coming on, and I'm going to let some of them go. And if they bait them off my property and kill them, it's just the way it is. I don't know what to say. I didn't buy it 100% for the deer hunting. I bought it for the place that it is. And I'm just going to kind of take a chill pill and enjoy it, do the best I can. And if I'm growing deer for other people, I guess I'll just have to let them take advantage of the situation,
Well, I mean, yeah, let's go back to this season, because you mentioned it at the outset, but let's go into a little more detail now.
Right.
Over the course of the archery season here this past fall, I think you said there were two different occasions that this deer was, I think, like in about 20-yard range, and you could easily have, harvested that buck, and you chose not to. So, tell me about those encounters and your thought process and kind of how you felt about all that at the time.
Yeah. Well, I still hunt my old way, which is, I call it running travel corridors. I don't set on food plots. I don't set around feeders or nothing. I've always had the ability to figure out where they are going to get between all that. And I get in there, and on November 1, about 8:00 in the morning, I'd been there since first light and had about 3 or 4 other little dinker bucks coming and going here and there. And classical, beautiful November morning, light frost and light wind and sunny, just one of them beautiful days to be alive. And about 8:30, I think it was in the morning, I looked across the creek in front of me, and I seen this guy pop out on my side of the creek. And he could have went anywhere, but he meandered right over there to me. There was a scrape in front of me, and he come over there and worked that scrape at 20 yards. And it was the first time I had been close to this deer ever. And he had actually chipped off a little bit of some of his antler back in the early, like the first few days of October. He'd evidently done some sparring or something, and he broke off about 1.5 to 2 inches off the tip of his left main beam, and about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch off his G5, 4, and 3 on his left side. And so when he got up there, I was looking at him, and he was blunted on those ends. And I thought, I was already made my mind up I was going to let him go before he ever appeared. And I looked at that, and that gave me a little bit better feeling. Like, I don't want to harvest him. Broke up a little bit, and he broke off a couple of non-typical points at that. He also had grown about 7 or 8 inches of extras down around his brow points, and a couple of them were broke off. And so we had an encounter that day. It was excessively fun, enjoyable. I went back and told Peg about it, and we laughed, and just, finally, point blank encounter with the big boy. And
so yeah, and you mentioned, so this deer had been around ever since you owned the property. He was probably 1.5 your first year, and
right.
And so you had a bunch of camera pictures of this deer, but that was the first time that morning that you were ever really close to him.
Yeah, first time I actually laid eyes on him. Even in the summer, this summer he was pretty local. He was coming out into one of my bean fields and clover, and he was eating and really putting on the inches. And I wouldn't go down there and try to set and look at him in person. I was getting some tremendous trail camera pictures of him, and they were good enough to suit me. And so I had never literally laid eyes on this deer alive that I know of. I might have, in the first year and not paid him any attention. Last year, I had some trail cameras of him in about 3 or 4 different locations. And I can't guarantee that I didn't glimpse him at a distance last year, but I hadn't really seen him that I knew of. And it was pretty impressive because he was one of those bucks this year that the minute you seen him, the second you laid eyes on him, he's an instant shooter. And you grab your bow and get excited. And it was weird to sit there and not grab that bow and go through the process of trying to do what you could to get this deer killed. It was different. I've never done that before, and it was a weird experience.
Yeah, I call those holy what bucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes when you're in hunting camps around the country, if I go on hunt with some outfitters around the country, and guys who don't, travel around as much, they always wonder, how will I know when it's a shooter, And I'm like, look, if a deer comes in and you think he's pretty nice, but then you immediately start debating in your mind, is he a shooter or isn't he? I'm like, that's not a shooter.
Right.
When you have a buck come in, that the first thing that comes into your mind when you first lay eyes on that deer is holy, what?
Yeah.
And you just want to grab your bow and get ready because that's a shooter. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this buck was like that. I mean, he had enough antler that he was a no-brainer to me. He was 1 year from being, he was kind of in that zone between big and huge.
Well, yeah, he was already a great buck, but like you said, he was 1 or 2 years away from being
giant,
truly special, right? Truly world class.
Yeah, I think he was going to go over 200 inches easily. I don't know though. I haven't watched this enough yet. I don't know if it's possible they can put on 35 inches 1 year and then maybe they don't do anything close to that again. I don't think so. I think if he'd have just put on 20 more inches like next year, he'd have been a 190 caliber deer. And then another year on top of that, he's well over 200. And what if he'd have put on 35 inches the next couple of years each time? He would have been a cover of a magazine buck, and
that's the disappointment, is that's what you wanted to find out, and you're not going to get the opportunity. But tell us about the second encounter, Eddie.
Yeah. November the 20th, I was in a different stand on the other end of my property down by my big creek, and beautiful creek bottom. I love sitting there. And it was another classical cold November morning with not a lot of wind. And I'd seen a few bucks that morning, and I was sitting facing west. The creek bottom run east-west, and I had to set the stand up to look east down the creek bottom. I had to look behind me, which I did not like doing. But ever so often, I'd look back there, and about 9 o'clock in the morning, I'd probably look behind me already 20 or 30 times that morning. And I look back here, and there he stood at about 60 yards, just standing there in that majestic head up position. And the minute my eye seen him once again, it was, oh my, that's a no-brainer, And I did not know it was him. I didn't know it was him because he was far enough I couldn't really pick him apart by eye. And I eased my little glasses up and looked, and then my brain engaged and said, that might be your 6x6. And I looked, and sure enough, it was him. And because if it had been a different buck, a new buck, one that didn't live on me, was a passer througher, this is a definite shooter buck. I would have been glad to have harvested him. But since he was our local, I said, well, here we go again. And sure enough, he comes and walks right by me at 20 yards going through the oak leaves. It was one of the most beautiful, and it was cold enough that every step he took, he was vapor clouds coming out his nostrils. It was just unbelievable. It was beautiful. And I took some still pictures of him with my handheld camera, and he chased a little buck off and did all that stuff right there around me. And I had him for 2 or 3 minutes at 30 yards and less, and beautiful. And I just had all I could do, because I had a little guy sitting here saying, you better get that. You better get that. You're not going to get it to live another year. And I went ahead and took my chance, and I don't regret it. It was fun, learning experience, and it hasn't jaded me to the point that I'm not going to let some others go. If I ever have another buck of that caliber genetics, I'll probably let him go and see if he can't get big. I'll shoot the older ones that ain't going to get big, and wait and see if I get a chance at another great one, one day.
Well, yeah. And like you said, you never know, because over the years, you are liable to have a handful of really nice bucks that don't necessarily, like you say, spend the majority of their time on your property, but they will
Right.
pass through during the rut, because just because you own a few hundred acres now doesn't
Right.
mean you're confined to only shooting the deer that are regular visitors to your property. During
Right.
the rut, anything can happen.
Well, yeah, and I've got some trail camera pictures from 2 different bucks that were passer throughers, I call them. One of them, one time, he come through and was gone. He was at least a 165 5x5, not a real old deer, one of the ones that you would like to take up residency on your place. And then I had another deer that's probably closer to the 4 or 5-year-old age that come in that was a flirting with 170, 6x5 typical, that had a common base point on his G2 and 3, just a big old heavy, nice buck. And he was on me for about 10 or 12 days, and then he disappeared again. But yeah, who knows? Potluck. I've got country around me that's so large and infinite, no public roads in it, big ranches. There could be a giant up here one day, you know.
Absolutely. So November 1st and November 20th,
Yep.
you had your 2 chances at this buck, and you obviously, had more or less made up your mind. Yeah, I mean, there's always some temptation in the moment, but my guess is you probably never took your bow off the hook either time.
I did not. Yeah, I left it hanging. Once you handle it, something, if you're a killer, that's danger when you handle that bow.
I always say, for me, it's not so much just having the bow in my hand, but if I draw, it's done. If I get to full draw, like I'm not sure if I've let down on a deer more than once or twice in my entire life, unless I had to, just because there was no shot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bad. I don't exercise a whole lot of self-control once I'm at anchor. But anyway, so now let's go to the day, that this deer was killed, obviously by somebody else. So what was the date on that, Eddie?
That was November the 30th, the opening day of Kansas Firearm. And I've got a little follow-up on that's kind of personal. It's hard for me to talk about because it hurts my feelings. But I got up that morning before daylight and made some coffee in our trailer. And I got a cup and walked out onto the we have a cement floored pole barn, and we park our trailer on the patio of it. And I walked outside, and it was just cracking gray light. And I looked off onto the prairie down below us, and I seen 3 deer down there in the grass. And I went and got the binos and looked down there, and I'll be doggone if it wasn't this big buck, this 6x6, following a hot doe with another fairly nice buck, a 130-ish type buck behind him, trying to kind of worry him, and get at her. And they were headed south toward my south boundary over there, which was only another, 300 yards or so ahead of them. And I sat there and watched him right out there in front of my building at 200 yards from my building. First time I'd ever seen him out in the open. He was in that stage of just, where they'll follow a hot doe out onto the 4 lane if the doe leads them out there. And something went through my mind saying, it's opening day of rifle season. You probably ought to throw your clothes on, get on the ATV, and run around to the far south end of your property and kind of bump them back into you. And I thought, no, I'm not going to play that game. That's getting a little bit silly in my book. That's not normal. I'm not going to do it. Well, evidently that doe led him right on over there, right on across my south boundary, and right over to that guy's corn pile. And that guy got a picture of that morning. I don't know what time, but mid-morning probably. And he jumped in that truck and run out there, and I'll be doggone, parked and walked around that hill. And Peg and I are sitting there on our patio when he pulls that rifle shot off.
You heard the shot?
Absolutely. 300 yards from us.
And did you get a sick feeling in your stomach the moment you heard that?
Absolutely. I told Peg, I said, well, that's either that buck or he has just shot a buck that suits him. And I said, we just got to hope and pray he shot a buck that suits him, because if our deer, I didn't know if our 6x6 went over there or not. I never physically saw him leave my property, but I had a suspicion he probably would, and he'd went over there. I jumped on my ATV and run over there because I was kind of in a quandary. I've never been in that position. It's a weird position, and I can't say that I really like it at all, because at that moment when that gun went off and I realized I might have lost that buck for good, it put a very sick feeling in my gut. And I realized right then and there that I'd become a little bit too possessive and a little bit too attached to that deer. And that's weird, because I've never had that to live through before.
Yeah. And so, and you get over there on your four-wheeler, and would you just drive right up the property line, like the borderland there, and see if you could see a hunter standing out there or something?
Well, he was just parked 50 yards off my fence, and I have permission to go over there, not to hunt. The people that lease it's 800 acres to my south, and they lease it for cattle. And we have an understanding, some of their cattle get over on me once in a while, and I let them come get them off. I don't even make them, let me know. And then they don't mind that I go over there once in a while, or that I run cattle back over to them. So I had permission. I just run over there on foot real quick to his truck, and he was walking back up there. And when I got there, I knew right off the bat, this wasn't going to be a pleasant experience, because the guy had a really sour look on his face and was not happy about me being over there wanting to talk to him. And he just kind of really wouldn't even talk to me. He did not want me there. And I don't know who the guy is. He's not one of the landowners. He's evidently somebody they let hunt. And finally, I just asked him, I said, buddy, I said, do you mind if I see what buck you shot? Because I just really would give anything to just know what you got. And he wouldn't even talk to me. He just turned around and started walking off. And I said, well, okay, I'm going to press this matter. If he wants to act like that, I can do it too. And I just took off walking right behind him. And he walked over there about 60 yards and there laid that buck.
He never even said anything to you when you followed him?
No, he didn't want me there, but I had already figured out he couldn't run me off either, or he would have done it. And so I just thought, well, two people can play this horse's rear game if you want. So I just took off after him and walked over there, and there the buck was. And then I asked him, I said, hey, bud, you mind if I tell you a little story about that buck there? And he didn't talk to me. I said, hey, I've been watching that deer for 2 or 3 years, and I let that deer walk here in the past month twice with my bow. I said, I'd just like some of you guys to maybe understand that I'm going to try to let some of these deer get big and grow mature out here. And he said, well, but basically if they're 150 and brown, they're down. Just kind of lipped off to me. And I thought, well, this isn't going nowhere. This is a fruitless conversation. So I just turned around and walked off and got on my ATV and went back to the property. And that was that.
How'd you get that picture with the buck?
Yeah, he did that. I can't believe I asked him. I had my phone in my pocket. I said, would you take a picture of this buck for me? I'd like to have a picture of this. So, and he just snapped it and gave me my phone back. And I headed out, and you can tell by looking in that picture, I'm pretty sick.
You look like you've seen a ghost, man. I mean, you do. You look like you're about to freaking yak. I'm telling you. Yeah. No, it's a weirdest picture of you. Cause of course, I've been like 15 years at the magazine, and I don't know how many hundreds of photos I've seen of you with dead animals.
Right.
And I never have seen another one before or since with the expression on your face in that picture. It was like, oh, that man is in shell shock right now.
Yeah. And that's not right. That's not right. He wasn't doing anything illegal. That pouring that pile of corn out over there is legal in the state of Kansas, spading. And so, he had every right to kill that deer. Do I like the fact that he invested 30 minutes to an hour of driving out there and walking around there and shooting it with a gun? No, I don't. But hey, it takes all kinds. gun hunters are humans too. And so at the end of the day, I've just got to be okay with it and move on, and just be happy that I got to grow that deer and know that deer. And it just broke my heart to see him get wiped out like that, though. He was just in that stupor of following a hot doe. He would have walked out in the middle of Interstate 40 and stood with her. And
but at the same time, Eddie, that's the magic of the rut. That's the only time that their defenses go down like that. And how many deer just like that deer have you taken advantage of over the years, right?
Oh yeah. And I've thought about that a lot. I've spent a lot of time in meditation since it. And I'm okay. I'm good to go. And nothing ventured, nothing gained. I've got a couple of two or three other bucks on me that have been around for 2 or 3 years now. And some of them are topped out. They're those bucks that are going to top out at maybe, 150, 55, 60, somewhere in there. And so I'm happy. I got a ton of young deer coming up, 2.5-year-olds that are the 125 types, got good genetics. I'm blessed. I'm happy to be in the position,
Well, absolutely. Because, when this first happened, we talked a little bit, and I kind of got the impression from you right off in the immediate aftermath that you were like, well, that was stupid of me, and I've learned my lesson, and I ain't going to try to do that again. Right. But now I can already tell, because now it's been like almost a month, and you've mellowed on that, and you've realized that honestly, what you went through. Now, I've never had the privilege yet, right? But my day is coming to get land like you did, right?
Right, yeah.
I think most guys, if we had a bunch of guys here on the show that had been in your shoes, would have a similar story, because everybody, when they first buy land, they have the visions of not only growing those big deer, but then harvesting them, because they're, as we said at the beginning of the show, those are your deer. But you have to learn that they're not all your deer. But if you stay this course over a period of time, Eddie, you will reap some rewards.
Right. And hey, what are rewards? I mean, how do you define trophies? How do you define rewards? I mean, if anybody ought to be in the latter stages of outdoorsmanship, it's me, because I'm not bragging. I'm not. I'm just stating some facts. In my lifetime, I've got to spend more time outdoors doing bow hunting and everything outdoors-ish, from fish. I mean, I lived the large life outdoors. And so I'm just happy to get to where I can define a trophy or define my reward as having this place and the solitude with it, and getting away from the rat race, having that warm, fuzzy feeling come over me when I drive into it. And the deer are just kind of an icing on top. They're 25% of the equation. 3/4 of my reward is that the good Lord bless me with a place to get old on, and hopefully pitch over dead off of that hill one of these days, and not have to be in the rat race all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Eddie, I knew it would be an interesting, conversation, and I'm glad we had the chance to do it. And it just goes to show, I think we answered a really profound question of the universe today, which is, can an old dog learn new tricks? And I would say, the answer is yes, because you are experiencing new things in bow hunting, that even after a lifetime of doing this, there's more adventure yet to be found. And if that adventure, isn't so much about killing anymore as it once was, that doesn't make it any less important or gratifying.
No, it's actually more, because you've got to eventually get off of the, I say that, but I know that there's a lot of bow hunters that will not get to progress, and I don't feel sorry for them, because it's not a bad thing. I mean, I lived that life for about 40 years of just scrapping and clawing and fighting for everything I got. But hey, that's a lean existence and it's very satisfying in its own way. Don't ever convince yourself you're not going to be happy if you don't get to go to that last level. I mean, I've got to experience it of the land ownership and, everything good about that. But if I hadn't have, I probably would have thought I was missing out on something. But at the end of the day, if you can just get out there and do your normal thing and get, figure out what you got to do to get some enjoyment, and don't base it on just antler size. Get some places to go and do some things bow hunting wise, whether it's out west or Midwest or east, it don't matter, north, south, wherever, and have fun and enjoy it. And just be happy with whatever state you're in,
Well, I think that's a great way to end it, Eddie. I can't top that. What you just said, that's some great advice. The only thing I will say is that there were a couple things that you brought up that I thought would be a great conversation. And I think we'll have to do a whole additional episode, maybe with another guest or two. Bait and cell cameras, those two things alone, I think we could have a really interesting hour-long conversation about just that.
I guarantee it. And I'd like to hear some perspectives from people that are totally against it, some that are, for it. And, out west, they're already in the process of doing away a lot with cell cameras and stuff, and I hope this baiting thing, I just don't get it. You can take one step from Kansas across the Missouri line and baiting's illegal. And I don't get it. If it's illegal and it's not a good thing, then I don't know. It's just like one state says you can smoke dope and the other says you can't. I don't get it. First, why don't we get what is right, what is wrong? These game and fish departments, I think they're spreading some of this disease stuff with this baiting. I mean, these baiting stations concentrate deer, and it can't be a good thing to have them all there in that close of contact that much year round, So anyway, we'll talk about that on down the line. That'd be a good topic.
Yeah, somehow I think I just had a weird idea for a successful business, which would be a combination marijuana dispensary and deer corn vendor. That's my home state, Oklahoma. Now you can bait here and you can smoke dope. We legalized medical marijuana, and we're the number one medical marijuana producer in the country now, and we're putting recreational on the ballot. So there you go. Well, that's good, man. That's good. Just if it doesn't work out here at Petersen's Bowhunting, I can go do that. Hey, man, listen, I always enjoyed catching up with you, my friend, and thanks for sharing those personal experiences with everybody. I think it was a really good episode, and people are going to enjoy and appreciate it, Eddie.
Well, I hope so. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for downloading the Petersen's Bowhunting Podcast. All bow hunting, all the time. Pick up the latest issue of Petersen's Bowhunting magazine on your local newsstand, or connect with us online at bowhuntingmag.com.